Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 24th. I've noticed that in running OBS twice and opening it up, it's moved my chat around a little bit. So there were some people in the past couple streams that have said hi and I have not seen it, so apologies to those people. I will try to be better on responding to chat and seeing chat. Starting late again, still working my way out of this minor emergency, so schedule's still a little bit off, although in fairness it's not stopped me as much. Here we have a Hanafuda card, although they're not even calling it that. They're just calling it the Flower Cardian Cherry Blossom with Curtain. But this is very much a traditional Hanafuda card, Japanese card, or flower card, as it might be also known as. They have added some new grades, apparently, for the proficiency test, which I think probably sucks terrible because the proficiency test is something I've completely forgotten about. Let's see if we can answer 5 out of 8 questions here real quick. What's the name of this card? Let's go with the first one. That's probably wrong. It's Cyber Dragon Seeger. Blah 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 blah. Let's go with 2,000. Oh, 4,000. Battle phase is skipped and in phase begins. Yeah, pretty much the only way I'm going to get this done is to guess my way through this and then guess through it a second time. So, what's been going on for the past couple days, as far as what YouTube and video game is related, is that I've been playing off-screen Hand of Fate 2 in an effort to just grind out the last bits so that I can actually finish the game and be done with it, so I can play Fallout New Vegas, which is my thought, certainly, on that case. But now it's just a matter of remembering what I clicked on before and hoping that we don't get different questions. $700, okay. Yeah, and I guess I really don't have too much to even say about Hand of Fate 2. It's really grindy. I'm putting a lot of effort into playing that game just to get to the end, when really I should just rage quit the game. But I'm trying my best. Plus I still have a lot of spare time in which it's just not it's just not a case where I feel safe making a recording and making an hour-long recording. But I am fairly safe to play off screen Notice here the proficiency test is asking me different questions each time. Or at least enough variety so that my brute force attempt here is not going to work. And let's say do this multiple times. How many do we need right? Inherently we need 5 out of 8. That's not even that much, but inherently this also highlights how uninterested I am in this proficiency test, on top of already being uninterested in Yu-Gi-Oh! I did have a thought I was going to stream earlier today, but that didn't work. Where I would have skipped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Completely. Or just played exactly one game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But yeah, timing got in the way there. I think we may win here already, but there's no extra bonus or reward for doing 8 out of 8 questions as far as I know. So that's 11, which I assume they just added 11. Otherwise, yeah, inflict battle damage on your opponent 0 out of 100,000. That seems like that is a fairly easy thing to have made at least a little bit of progress on. I am getting better at going back to my Steam Deck and playing with that. I don't know if I said this out loud before, but it, to me, looked like the Steam client in desktop mode. The program that runs the keyboard and mouse and runs Steam was preventing the screensaver from ever activating, and that caused a problem where my Steam Deck battery was completely at 0. I'm not 100% sure if that isn't really the case. It is a known issue, to say the least, that has been around for years for the Linux version of the Steam client, and the inherent problem with Valve and the way it's structured is that there's really no accountability for anybody to take ownership of a bug and work on fixing a bug or even care about a bug. Now inherently, a private company could also be run that, a public company could also be run that way, in the same way that Valve is a private company, but generally speaking, most companies are run with some level of accountability. And that is probably a lot less to do with it being private or public, and a lot more to do with it being just a overfunded company. Valve is, in the sense that there's just not any real hunger there to make sure they're making the best product. Particularly for Linux, it makes a lot of sense that they wouldn't focus on the Linux client, because before the Steam machines and the Steam Deck itself, there's just been no major success in having Linux gaming be a thing. Of course, now the danger certainly is that maybe Valve will just put out the Steam machine and then lose interest in it. They tend not to do that, but the fact that they're still interested in VR really didn't help anything further than making Half-Life Alyx, and that's about it as far as I'm concerned, is that they made Half-Life Alyx, which is, from all accounts, a great game that the vast majority of people will just never play because they won't have a VR headset, and they've made no interest or no movement whatsoever to make a non-VR version of Half-Life Alyx. which maybe it really wouldn't work that way, but it does eliminate a large potential audience there. I feel like I'm probably stalling a little bit to get to this because I want to go to this dual triangle. We'll try the synchro group today. But yeah, I'm not sure if setting an environment variable to allow the screensaver worked. It does still seem like the Steam Linux client on the Steam Deck and probably everywhere else is preventing the screensaver from coming on, is preventing dimming from coming on, is preventing it from going to sleep, which certainly can be a big problem if you just are on desktop mode and nothing is happening, and the one app that everybody has to have open, which is Steam Client because it runs the keyboard, is also preventing the screensaver for no good reason. It didn't hit the right button, I guess. Otherwise, I haven't really put a lot of time into it. I really have been I spent probably 3 to 6 hours, probably closer to 3, yesterday playing Hand of Fate 2, making no footage at all. And Hand of Fate 2, very obviously, you won't get to the ending. You probably won't get to the ending at all. You'll probably be smarter than me and rage quit much earlier. But you won't get to the ending unless you've upgraded all of the first 4 companions to their final path. That seems almost certainly what has to happen. And even then, it's going to be a hassle. And even then, you're still going to need to grind out items and equipment. And you get some of these brimstone cards that are super difficult, and you kind of need to do those also, because achieving a brimstone card will get you a stronger weapon, which is what you need, or a stronger piece of armor. And almost all the cards and equipment cards have tokens and requirements and actions to unlock them, and you're just not going to get everything unlocked. I still am very close to like 40 out of 99% of the achievements accomplished, even though I'm very close to the end of the game. And so overall, it's just not worth the time. It's not worth the effort, particularly since I just don't really like the main dish that is being offered there with Hand of Fate 2. And I'm playing on easy mode too, so when I choose easy mode in the game, I'm really expecting an easy breezy experience where it's just a casual. For Hand of Fate 2, it should have been a casual 25-hour gameplay experience. It's not as bad, I would say, as what is the other one that's super popular or was promoted by at least mainstream video game journalists a lot. Darkest Dungeon, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Darkest Dungeon, really not upgrading anything, not giving you any real chance to beat that final boss regardless of how much you grind, really. Or there's just way too much grind and way too much chance of failure even if you grind the characters to the max levels in Darkest Dungeon. So I will say Hand of Fate 2 is at least a little bit of a RPG light experience, where I would say, not an RPG, yeah, it is more of an RPG experience than a roguelite or a roguelike experience, where I'd say Darkest Dungeon is a roguelite experience, very close to a roguelike, and that almost no progress carries over in a roguelike. We need better terms to differentiate between a roguelite and a roguelike. I tossed out another email or comment. Really, it's issues that I'm opening on GitHub to programmers. As far as seeing if they will possibly modify what is probably the default KDE alarm clock app to be more functional and useful for devices like the Steam Deck. Anybody can make an alarm clock app. The default clock app in KDE doesn't really have alarms as far as I can tell. So there's kind of two separate things there where it probably should just be one. And it is a very unique situation, certainly, for the Steam Deck and portable devices that you might want to use them as an alarm clock. Particularly when it docks, people might want it to dim the screen and do a dark mode digital clock on the face of it and possibly show the next alarm that is upcoming. Those are all the kinds of things you'd kind of expect and hope that would just exist. And it's called K-Alarm for KDE. And we'll see if anybody responds to that, or if that thought will probably just be left on the cutting room floor. Like, I don't think I'm going to spend the energy to try to make my own alarm clock. The Arch Linux build on the Steam Deck has an application called USB-devices that lists all the USB devices. There are certain classes for hubs and monitors and some other things that might be hubs and monitors. There's about 4 classes out of maybe 20 or 30 of them that are pretty obvious types of devices that if a Steam Deck was plugged into those, you would think that it was being docked, and that it would make sense to have the option at least for the digital clock to pop up at that point. Now, what you don't want to do there is have it just detect for any USB device, or detect if it is just getting power, because those can be very different scenarios. And it might be a case where people want to dock it, but the dock they have doesn't supply power or pass through power. That'd be a pretty poor quality dock, but it's possible. And you don't want your Steam Deck to go into a digital clock mode every single time you plug it in. So, yeah. Same would be true for like webcams and microphones and things like that. Those are not the kinds of devices that would be indicative of plugging into a dock, or when you would want that scenario to happen. But otherwise, it seems like it would be pretty easy to do that. And since the alarm clock probably wants the screen dimmed but still on, the right way to program that would be to use their D-bus interface to prevent the screensaver from kicking in and adjusting the brightness. And I question if maybe, because everything is so sandboxed with flat packs, like this really should be less than 100 lines of code, probably closer to 20 to do the whole thing. But maybe with the sandboxed element of programs and flat packs on Arch Linux and KDE, maybe there is some extra hoops you need to jump through, or extra limitations that would prevent you from seeing what other USB devices. Very clearly, Linux is not caught up yet, and may take a while or may never catch up to what Android does, where Android's concept of security and permission-based settings, and then having permissions removed and revoked if you haven't used the application in a while, like all of that is just a whole new way of thinking compared to Windows programs or Linux programs, and it is just a whole new way of thinking as far as security, which was required certainly because there's just so many so much potential of Android apps being abusive, stealing too much information from users. And certainly that's one of the benefits you have when, even though Android is pretty old now, it's still relatively a baby compared to every other operating system out there, except for maybe iOS. So when you have a relatively new operating system, you can just rethink things and go, hey, what is more realistic and what is the most important things there. Of course, I wouldn't even say, well, it's nice that their whole permission system and how it goes. It's not like it really has added a lot of safety and security or a feeling of security to the creators. Because very quickly, almost every app is always requesting everything, and when it requests like location information, it's often a case where the app just explains away in some way why you need to say yes, and almost everybody is just going to click the yes button. And so many apps ask for so many permissions anyways. I don't think though that Flatpaks are particularly anywhere better though. It basically is almost the same thing. A Flatpak on the Steam Deck is as sandboxed as an Android app is, with Android perhaps having more permissions and more ways to interconnect with things. Notably, Windows and Linux don't just roll out of the box with like share buttons and those concepts. Which, that is another thing about the Steam Deck that feels very weird, is that when you, on the touchscreen, hold your finger down, you expect it to spin a little wheel and pop up a right-click menu, and it just doesn't do that. And I would expect that to happen on anything with a touchscreen. That all being said, I still didn't work on my Entomber script, which, you know, just every day I feel worse and worse about not finishing things, and I feel like I'm just getting more and more incapable of finishing projects. Yes, the priority is to play Hand of Fate 2 and finish that and start making content and start scheduling things over just a script that doesn't really mean that much, but it also really sucks that I've had several projects in a row now where I've gotten what felt like 80 to 90% done, and then I just lose enthusiasm for it. Just a fear of failure or a fear of success or whatever. And that got me thinking, certainly in some of the jobs I worked in the past, about how many of those jobs were rather short task jobs. A large amount of people's jobs are like that, where you're doing something for maybe an hour or two, and it's not big projects. Which is weird, because in my IT ambitions, if I was going to try to be an IT person again, I would want to work on long-running big projects, and I would like to just work on those forever and maybe never finish it. And maybe that's why I want to work on long-running development, DevOps type projects. But a large amount of jobs are certainly flip that burger and turn it out in 5 minutes, or get a checkout and get that customer through in 10 minutes. And then just repeat, rinse and repeat. Just brain dead, follow the procedure, do it over and over again. Don't put any thought into it. You won't run into any problems, and if you do run into any problems, you just call a manager over and then the manager handles it. And I can't help but wonder if there is a fairly large percentage of people who are best suited for that type of work. Although I heavily question if human beings are suited for work at all. It's in the human nature to do the least amount of work, and animal nature too. That's why you see cats and dogs sitting around doing nothing but preserving energy. But yeah, I imagine there's also a lot of people that would I would imagine that there's a lot of people that wouldn't know what to do with themselves if they were told to just work on a project from scratch and finish it in 2 weeks. And a lot of times projects that I have seen people work on are often just these incredibly overhyped, stupid, busy work things, making PowerPoints, making a speech, making a presentation, things like that. Well, this is once again taking way too long, and we started late again, and so I don't think I really have anything more to say, even. So, while I'd like to win on some of this definitely feels like I should just give up now on this event and instead spend my time playing ranked, or at least have a chance. And there's no chance here at all to what was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, there's no chance here for me to get my like Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck up and going and play something similar to that. This guy has Zeus on the field somehow, but I don't know how he did it. What is he playing? XYZ? He would have to be playing XYZ characters, I would think. I think this probably highlights my struggle here. Probably highlights the problem, which is that none of the loner decks can even come close to competing versus even a slightly well thought out top tier meta deck, only slightly being modified for the limitations of this event. And so that inherently highlights that the event itself was not well thought out. And I don't know how you really fix that. I would say probably the best bet would be to have Konami just have events based on previous time frames. Here is playing if you were playing in, say, 1995. So you can only play cards up to the release of 1995 or something like that. Well, and maybe you limit it on both sides, so it's like you can only play cards that have been released between 1990 and 1995. Blast from the past type events. Gamatsu has an article here. Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord remake is launching May 23rd for all consoles and PC. Now, Wizardry is something I recognize. The question is it something that's really even relevant or playable even in a remake state? You look at these screenshots and they've visually polished what is a dungeon crawler as best as they can. They have 6 team members here. But it still is really just a dungeon crawler. I have very little confidence that you can actually get modern gamers, or even people who might have been nostalgic for wizardry, which you'd have to be particularly old to be nostalgic for wizardry. Yeah, I'd have to really question whether you could get modern gamers to play that. And inherently, it is the kind of thing that, if it is going to have any relevancy, it probably should just be a mobile game. But they've tried that also with previous dungeon crawler old games, just putting them on mobile, and that too doesn't work. Of course, the Steam Deck maybe makes a new argument, but even in this case, I don't think that's a good argument, because the Steam Deck is already too powerful to be used for the likes of such a simplistic game like wizardry. Yep. I would throw a thought out here that almost certainly the characters have been updated in the visuals, and almost certainly there's a lot more diversity in the game than there once was. But yeah. The other problem you're going to run into, or at least I personally would run into, is like, why would I want to play a wizardry game when I could play, say, a Persona game, which has so many other elements to it to make it more of a modern twist on a dungeon crawler, or a Neptunia game, which I believe are also dungeon crawlers, or any number of other there's at least 3 or 4 series that I think you could name pretty easily from Japan that are dungeon crawlers. Yeah, at best you're hoping, I guess, that there is some historical value there. I don't know what cards I'm supposed to be drawing here. Censored Gaming did a channel update, basically saying that he's not done anything recently, which, in fairness, he kinda hasn't. He reposted something on April 8th. Last thing he made was on April 5th. I don't really mind him not doing any post if there really isn't that big of news. Between Final Fantasy XIV's Xbox chat being censored on April 5th, there hasn't been a ton of news around censorship except for one story that just broke. He'll almost certainly do that. But it does kind of come off like where Dan here, the maker, the guy in charge of Censored Gaming, it's interesting he's let his real name slip, and it does make him feel like more of a personal person, and with all his personal problems, knowing him by a real name also, I think, adds some sympathy that I might have for him. But it seems like he might be a little bit manic. Not to really diagnose people over the internet without having any qualifications to do so, but he does seem like he has these bursts of energy to work a little too hard in small sections, when the timing really should just lock in and find itself as to when he should make content that is news-based or that needs to be made, and then any time he has free should be him doing more retrospective type content as far as how censorship has affected games in the past. And he basically said that's what he was focusing on too, is that Censored Gaming is going to mostly focus on news first and foremost, regardless if people don't want to watch it or it doesn't get views. And then he's thinking about doing retrospectives about censorship, although he wants to do retrospectives around censorship in cartoons and anime, which, while that should be discussed, it probably has already been discussed to death, and it doesn't have any real connection to video games. The retrospectives probably should be from old games. And I could see you could go even a little silly with it, and you could say, what would Super Mario Bros. 1 look like if there wasn't censorship back in the days when Super Mario Bros. 1 came out? And you would have to speculate fairly wildly there, but you would assume instead of Mario jumping on turtles and them just getting squashed, Mario would be jumping and crushing turtles into a bloody mess. When he drowns in the water levels, he would probably gasp for air and drown in a hyper-realistic form. When he hits his head on a brick and breaks the brick, maybe that would cause his head to bleed. Honestly, that kind of speculation is probably not as good of a thought in Super Mario Bros., where it would make a lot more sense to talk about like Doom or Mortal Kombat 1, games that inherently were more mature. And yeah, you probably don't even have to really speculate there as far as just, let's just do a side-by-side comparison of here's what punching looks like in the original Doom game versus here's what punching looks like in the Doom reboot. It is weird too, though, that he just kind of put out a video making promises and saying, I'm going to put out new content soon, instead of just staying silent until he had content. Or just, honestly, it wouldn't be terrible if he just kind of tweeted text things every now and then also. Looking in a retrospective form as far as what games sold better at different age ratings, or how games may have been affected by their sales by being censored, might be an interesting thought too. But I don't expect Censored Gaming as a channel to really do too much new in the next few weeks. I imagine he will just make a few random videos and then go quiet again. YouTube creators put out a thing 4 hours ago as far as tailoring your homepage to editing basic info. YouTube Studios customized pages has all the tools you need to make your channel unique. Nothing in these YouTube Studio customization pages I think has been changed, so this is really a case of them just promoting what is a very old and underutilized feature, and a fairly unimportant feature overall, because we know that very few YouTubers ever make it to a YouTube creators page. So you can customize that all you want, and very few YouTube viewers even look at the description. All of that has been intentionally de-emphasized by YouTube, so if anything, I would say that's kind of a prime example of how YouTube will just straight up lie to content creators and push them in the wrong direction when the algorithm is going to promote things. It's not going to have any connection at all to what they're suggesting. There was a couple of YouTubers, a group of YouTubers that were called Watcher, that tried to convince everybody to go to their subscription service, even though they already had a Patreon for, I believe it was like $7 a month, which is like more than the ads version of like Netflix, and definitely not really that comparable. I recently was listening to a Twitch.tv podcast, and Leo Laporte was talking about how their subscription service, Club Twit is what it's called, has only about 2% of their audience subscribed for $7 a month, and that's like, yeah, that's way too much money. Yeah, you'll get a passionate few, but that is not in any way a realistic amount of money to ask for what are effectively maybe 5 weekly tech podcasts and 1 daily tech news podcast worth listening to. Particularly when you know that Leo Laporte has a occasional habit, I'll say it's occasional, of eliminating a lot of people or pushing out a lot of people and canceling shows. Like, the vast majority of all the podcasts don't need to be in a podcast network at all and could just be run out of everybody's house over Skype, and it is basically just that at this point anyways. They used to have more of a studio and studio cameras, but it is very much just remote work at this point. Which that definitely makes me think about, like, as my channel slowly creeps towards potential monetization itself, the requirements for like memberships I think is lower. But for the life of me, I could not think of any way to do a membership that makes any sense at all. Like, I'm struggling to make content as it is. I'm struggling to get viewers and watch time as it is. So breaking that up into a different tier doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I would prefer people just support me on Patreon if they were going to do that, and just a no reward, I want to support this person for maybe $1 or $2 a month. Yeah. I couldn't imagine offering much. I guess if maybe my content got really good and there was a lot of it already, maybe you could lock some really bad, like, first 10 year ago content behind a membership, but that wouldn't really be that valuable either. And I haven't seen any other YouTubers really succeed with memberships on YouTube. I would much prefer money come out of YouTube's pocket some other way, or go through a different third party. It might be a case also that YouTube was promoting redoing your YouTube page and customizing things, because at the moment Google is dealing with a lot of employees, probably not a significant amount of employees, who did a sit-down protest in the business and then were told to leave, and then the police said, "You've got to leave now or you're going to be arrested," and they said no, and then the police arrested them. Which, yeah, it was a sit-down protest, I think, for like somewhat pro-Gaza, but specifically for the fact that Google just did some kind of military contract with Israel worth billions of dollars. And so the fallout of that protest that happened several days ago is now that YouTube is, I mean, not YouTube, but Google themselves are sorting through the mess and firing people who are involved. But yeah, I'd say don't talk about politics and religion ever to anybody. other than maybe your closest of friends, is one bit of advice. Second bit of advice is don't expect or think for a second that a corporation is a human being with any morals or soul whatsoever. Google's #1 goal is going to be to make money, and they kind of don't care who they make money from if they can get away with it. And I guess I need to applaud the YouTuber, the Google employees, in that they actually did a real protest and actually got thrown in jail for the real protest. They weren't just armchair activists posting on Twitter or Facebook or Reddit or something. They actually stood up for their own principles and were willing to suffer the consequences. Like the old days of protesting. So I will applaud that. And it does seem like, in this case, they were protesting for what sounds like a fairly legitimate reason, too. It's not just some dumb SJW woke argument that couldn't actually ever be addressed or had no basis in reality at all. Almost certainly you'll see Google becoming more corporate and being more careful in the future to not have groups of employees who feel like they can protest, because they definitely don't want that disruption, and they definitely do want to make government contracts that make them lots and lots of money. That "don't be evil" motto has long since been removed from Google. It once was the case, but even then, Google was often mocked for being evil in many people's eyes. We talked about this in the last stream. Kazuma Kaneko, longtime Atlas artist, has departed after a 35-year run. This is from GameDeveloper.com. Now pointing that out and reminding people. Valve today updated the Steam refund policy to cover your advanced access playtime. The company will start tracking pre-launch playtime to close a refund loophole. So what I would take from that is that up until this point, if you had advanced access to a game, if you were getting a review code, for instance, so that would put you closer to being a mainstream video game journalist. Apparently you could play the game there in that advanced access period and then potentially do something very immoral as a video game journalist and ask for a refund, which would effectively be money laundering through Valve, a kickback from the game publishers and game developers. But inherently, I would say you're already getting a kickback by just getting the valuable item of a game for free for review. Many people wouldn't use the phrase kickback, but it is effectively the same thought. Sponsorship, kickback, consideration. Now it is a little weird that they're showing the Steam Deck here, and it's a little weird that the Steam Deck with its theming on Cocoon is so much darker than, say, Cyberpunk 2077 would be if they had moved the controller to the right. Tweak means any playtime amassed prior to the title's official release will now count towards the Steam refund policy. Valve's current refund policy allows people to return a title for any reason if the refund request is submitted within 14 days of purchase and they have no more than 2 hours of playtime. Oh, I didn't realize that the 14 days of purchase wasn't a thing. So that would inherently mean I have hundreds if not thousands of games that I've never played once, but I definitely bought them more than 14 days ago. Um, the good news there is very few of those games really need to be refunded, or would I want to refund them. But it does highlight where buying a bunch of games on a Steam summer sale, which I'm still not sure they're actually doing, is a great way to be disqualified for that no questions asked refund policy. It's also important to point out that you could still ask for a refund for it after 14 days and after 2 hours of gameplay. They may say no. It might as well be 30 days because you could dispute the charges on a credit card in 30 days. So apparently Advanced Access is a feature that allows users to have pre-purchase the game to play prior to the game's official release. So it seems like they're really targeting people who buy the $100 bundle versions and closing the loophole there, which is fine. Like, there's nothing particularly too egregious, it seems like, going on here. With this update. This guy's lowering his life. If only he could get his life down one more time, then I could attack and do 100 damage and potentially win. If it's even gonna let me win. Video Games Chronicle says Blizzard is seeking a handful of directors to work on an unannounced game. Now, I don't know why you would need a handful of directors. It recently canceled a survival game that had reportedly been in development for 6 years. This would be the first hint of post-acquisition Blizzard actually doing something. The other thought certainly would be maybe Activision or King should also announce something and make some thoughts, put some ideas out there. It's also worth pointing out that in January they laid off 1,900 staff across Xbox, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard. So yeah. So yeah, I don't really have a ton of hope, as it were, around a new game from Blizzard being anything close to anything anybody wants. And I feel almost the same with Bethesda. With the major success of the Fallout TV series, which I'm not going to talk about much today, I almost wonder if it would be nice if Bethesda just was shuttered and instead the Fallout series became a TV series first and foremost and worked better that way somehow. But yeah, if you're seeking out a handful of directors, 6 director roles, including creative director and narrative director, they're looking for an entire management staff, which makes me suspect they already have 6 people in mind, and they're just listing this job listing as a legal requirement. But regardless, unless it is a very, very select group of 6 directors, it's probably not the PlayStation, the Blizzard that we've seen in the past and liked in the past, which there is a increasingly narrow window as far as when people liked Blizzard and Blizzard games. It would be, for me, definitely pre-Overwatch 1. Probably pre-Diablo 3. PlayStation Store, according to Video Games Chronicles, May savings promotion includes discounts up to 75% off. Over 2,000 products are on offer until May 8th. Now, those numbers compared to a Steam sale, though, are pathetically low. Pathetic in that 75% is the max you can save, and that only 2,000 products. Because there's no guarantee that the 2,000 products on the PlayStation Store are any better than the potential 10,000 products plus that could be discounted on a Steam sale. Stellar Blade is in the hands of early access reviewers, mainstream journalists. We have Video Games Chronicle here giving it a 4 out of 5, saying Stellar Blade is one of the most mechanically satisfying action games of the generation. DF Retro talked about it too, and they seem to rather like it. Maybe a small bit of visual issues here and there, but otherwise just an absolutely great game that is finished and polished, is one of the things DF Retro said from the beginning. It's not buggy, it's not waiting for a patch for any good reason. We will talk about the patch that is coming in a second. DF Retro said it had great visuals, and that was pretty much it. They didn't bother to go with any of the lewd controversy, they just stayed out of it. Which I'm pleasantly surprised, frankly, because knowing Shift Up had only made mobile games before, I'm surprised that they were able to knock one out of the park. I almost wonder, though, here's where you can put on a tinfoil hat in conspiracy. Did Tencent or some other company actually make Stellar Blade, and are they simply smuggling the game code through Korea so it's not just a Chinese game that it would then be under the limitations of Chinese law? That would be very tinfoil hat conspiracy and conflict directly with developer diaries, where we've seen people in Korea, the Korean staff, creating the games. So the more realistic thing to assume is that Shift Up just had this in them to actually make a AAA game, which I'm surprised. They so far have not tried to cancel Stellar Blade for its lewdness, and instead they have decided to cancel Stellar Blade for a piece of graffiti next to another store sign, or a piece of graffiti that they accidentally put together. Almost certainly the graffiti was randomly placed and nobody checked it, plus Korean people. There's a piece of graffiti that just says hard, H-A-R-D, and then there is a shop and a character, I believe her name is Roxy, who has a shop, and so there's an R on the wall for Roxy's shop. The hard R next to each other, people are complaining about in one very specific space, because they are taking that to mean the N-word with a hard R, which almost certainly was not the intent by anybody in Korea. I'm not sure like they would even know the phrase hard R in Korea. They know the N-words, sure, but hard R. Plus, it's important to point out that movies often are described as going for a hard R, as an R for restricted rating. And when I saw it, I just have this personal privilege, I guess is what you describe it as, where my mindset wasn't in that at all. When I saw hard R, I was thinking retarded was the word that people were complaining about, and that is the hard R, but I guess that's the R word, not hard R. But yeah, exactly one day after they made a big to-do about Stellar Blade not being censored anywhere in the world, they are immediately going to send out a patch to censor it. And perhaps censorship is the wrong word in some people's minds, because this is simply changing something that wasn't the artist's original intent, or at least they're claiming it wasn't their original intent in the first place. But yeah, I think original intent is probably the wrong yardstick to use to measure whether something's been censored. I think it has to be its original form, because if you use original intent as your yardstick, then there is kind of a Star Wars remake problem there, where when the remakes were made, that was the original intent for the remakes of George Lucas. But it's still very much a censorship, a changing of what the original trilogy, 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars was. So, yeah. I think original intent has to go away, and you have to say censorship happens when a form of art is released to the public. We probably can't push it before that point. We can't really say an artist who's halfway done with a painting and not showing it to anybody and then throws away the painting or burns it is probably not self-censoring himself to a level that it's hurting society. But once something is available to the public, it hits that checkpoint where things should be always available to the public in its original form. If you want to make a variant, that's fine. Of course, it's also not a hill to die on, and it's very easy to see and agree with Shift Up and PlayStation, and let's face it, it is PlayStation, to say we're just going to put a patch to move that graffiti around into another piece of graffiti. And certainly you can look upon it as an example of certain mainstream video game journalists and reactionary journalists looking for any reason whatsoever to cancel Stellar Blade in particular, or complain about video games in particular. And if that's all they've got, is that what was probably randomly placed piece of graffiti is too close to the letter R, that speaks a huge amount towards what I suspect the experience would be playing Stellar Blade. Okay, let's see. Use event deck. Copy from my deck. Zodiac Tri-Brigade. So we could have Zeus. But yeah, we already have Zeus. Well, why did I lose Zeus? Yeah, I'd have to think of a whole new deck for that to work. I'm very much just stuck here, where I've now tried each of the 9 decks and not really won very well with any of the loner decks. This would be about the best one I would bet I could do. Meanwhile, unless I spent some extra energy playing off screen, I'm just expecting I'm not going to actually get the dual triangle missions done. And there's a decent amount of daily quests I'm not going to get done today either. But I again started late, so I just don't see a reason to spend extra time here. The next big story we have, the suspect has been charged in Japan for canceling Nintendo Japan events by threatening to, quote, kill everyone, or, quote, poopy, well, I guess I can't say quote, and then change what it says, so I'll have to say, quote, shitty games. Now, this is a poorly written headline, which is fairly common for Video Games Chronicle, in that the suspect has not obviously been charged for canceling a Nintendo Japanese event. There aren't laws in Japan saying that it's illegal to cancel a Nintendo Japan event or cancel events in general. He's been charged with making threats and terroristic activity or something along those lines. And this almost certainly is just an irate Japanese person that really had no means or ability or wouldn't have actually done anything. That being said, you can't blame Nintendo of Japan for being cautious, considering the Kyoto arsonist was also a crazy person who managed to burn down the entire, I believe it's Kyoto Animation Studio. A big part of that, I think, though, is that the building was not built up to standards and that you would expect and fireproof. That being said, I'm not sure very many Japanese buildings are up to standards. Here's, I believe, this may be the mock-up of the new Nintendo building that they're working on. Obstructing business by force is an interesting law. But yeah, it does definitely feel like the Japanese people are a lot more irate post-COVID now than they would have been pre-COVID. That seems like it's just a slightly delayed reaction to the way people around the world seem to be more irate and crazy that the volcano has blown after COVID in particular. The problem that gets me here is it's not clear what game he was referring to. So yeah, when I think about Japanese Nintendo games, like what's the worst Nintendo game that Nintendo themselves has made, unless we're going down the route of blaming them for allowing the eShop to be full of crappy games, which there's a decent argument that they have done no curation on their eShop at all. Like Princess Peach Showtime is very much a young kid's game and not that great. But I don't think there's a single major flop that could be pointed to as far as from Nintendo. Nintendo just has that selling power and that attention catching power. I would be very interested in hearing what he thought were the bad games, or which bad game he's actually talking about. But that would also just be talking to a crazy person, so there's not really any reason to do that. And I would hope that that person was more put into a mental asylum than thrown into the overly regimented and regulated Japanese judicial system, because obviously this isn't just a case of somebody doing something criminal that's logical. It's very illogical actions for no obvious goal, or not really being able to accomplish much. Let's see, we are going to talk about the Fallout TV show. Apparently, Video Games Chronicle says that the Fallout TV show has led to a massive listenership boost for soundtrack artists, which seems like Video Games Chronicle is really scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point to once again write a article with Fallout in the name. And if anything, I think this probably highlights a problem with the streaming service model, that Amazon really hasn't been too proactive in doing this anywhere as bad as Netflix has. Netflix will put out entire seasons, but most of the time in the past, Amazon has tried to release things on a weekly basis and make it more of an appointment television experience. It is weird that they chose not to do that with Fallout, because very noticeably I think we're going to see a fairly wide gap between the Fallout TV series coming on Amazon TV and anything else of interest coming out on the Amazon TV for anybody, let alone for fans of the Fallout TV series or the Fallout games. If Amazon were to triple down on this concept, you would think that they would have 3 to 5 new video game based TV series greenlit, and you would try to schedule those episodes to release on more of a weekly basis. And yeah, that Twisted Metal TV series is, I guess, still in production. The Borderlands movie, I guess, is still in production. It's a little surprising there isn't a Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie that has been announced or in production, but not super surprising. Sony personally was funding a lot of those video game movies, and Sony Pictures was funding it, and I think that money dried up. We certainly aren't seeing any over-the-air ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox affiliates or channels trying to have video game TV series, and we're not seeing HBO or any other extended cable or basic cable channels have video game related content. That may all change in the next year or however long it takes them to turn around something. But it's also important to point out that there was that Netflix Resident Evil TV series, and that was awful and really had very little to do with Netflix. I mean, really very little to do with Resident Evil. But yeah, I think we'll see some also-rans, at least 2 or 3. And if Amazon was smart, they would probably try and make some more series to line up with Season 2 of Fallout and see how that goes. The most logical thing would be, let's just greenlight a Elder Scrolls TV series and have that air at the same time as Season 2 of Fallout. Or maybe even get a little creative there, and you have some kind of game show or just Dungeons and Dragons style video cast of people playing some Elder Scrolls themed Dungeons and Dragons type tabletop game. You could go in that direction too. So far, of the few successful TV series based on video games, I'm pretty sure they've all been fairly episodic, fairly serious and dramatic. We haven't seen the other genres. We've never seen a reality TV video based off of a reality TV show based off of a video game. We've never seen a game show that's been based off a video game. Well, not in recent time, at least. There was a couple many decades ago. But yeah, we haven't seen comedy. We know Comedy Central is going to try and make a Golden Axe animated comedy series. I assume it's a comedy series. And that's from some of the people who worked on Star Trek Lower Decks, which they announced that Star Trek Lower Decks was ending. Which points out that that entire series is going to have come and gone without me being able to actually see more than a couple seasons on free samples on Amazon Prime, because I'm not willing to pay for Paramount Plus. But yeah, you could easily greenlight game shows and quicker things along those lines. And then you could certainly run the danger of just trying to bring back G4, as it were, or something like G4, where it's just a lot of people talking about games all the time, which that still could work if you got the right people. But who are the right people is going to be the question. Anyways, moving on. So, there is this community backlash, according to Video Games Chronicle, after 2K has banned a leading WWE 2K24 creator. The quote here is, "There was no warning. What's the status is known for uploading content that is usually inaccessible to players." Which, what do they mean by that? He apparently got banned with no option to appeal, which that's always a problem. Mods which negatively impact the game experience for other players violate their terms, is all they're willing to say. I'd like to go deeper in this, but also I just kind of don't care about WWE 2K. They certainly don't need more controversy after the whole Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon controversy, which they're desperately trying to get people to ignore. But here we are, and I still don't think any of the wrestling games are actually good, and there's really no excuse for that. They should be at least a little bit better every year, but often they feel pretty awful. Atari has decided to relaunch Infogrames, which I guess was a subsidiary that they owned, or that Atari owned when Atari went out of business and their name got bought up. And then they've immediately bought Totally Reliable Delivery Service, which definitely seems like they had to pick a name that they probably already owned to acquire something else and put a label on it, so it sounds like it's something new. Infogrames is a game company I recognize, but I don't recognize any of these logos at all. In its heyday, Infogrames was known for developing and distributing titles like Alone in the Dark, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Driver, Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey through various subsidiaries. Let's see. Is there anything else? Eventually, Infogrames chose to rebrand under the Atari banner. That decision was made a few years before the company declared bankruptcy, sparkling a intellectual property fire sale and years of corporate reshuffling that eventually saw Atari re-emerging in its current guise. Yeah. I don't think there's probably much value in using Infogrames as a logo or as a name these days. Apple has reaffirmed its faith in Apple Arcade, says the Vision Pro is included in its platform plans. It kind of doesn't matter though if Apple has faith in its own marketplace or its own service, though. The rumors that are being bounded about is that game developers and publishers have no faith in it. And even when you look here at these pictures, none of these games are recognizable to me. have no idea what they are. This one looks like a tower defense game. This looks like a stealth game. This looks like this might be another tower defense game. This looks like this might be a stealth game. Clearly this looks like a girly dress-up game. And this could be maybe a top-down adventure game. But could I name any of these games? Absolutely not. Yeah. And I personally wouldn't have a lot of faith in Apple having enough attention span to care about Apple Arcade. Particularly now that they're opening up the door to more emulators being on the iPhone and the iPods. I guess iPhones. iPods don't really exist anymore, do they? The Alone in the Dark developers, Pieces, the developer of Alone in the Dark, called Pieces, has laid off staff following the revival's release. Yeah, nobody's really talking about Alone in the Dark. It didn't really get enough fanfare. Unfortunately, the problem with the video game industry these days, it feels like, is that it doesn't matter if a game is successful. It doesn't matter if it's a total piece of garbage. Layoffs seem to be planned well before a game ever hits the shelves, or possibly even before the game gets greenlit and starts development. It's just the way the industry has embraced wholeheartedly a system of exploitation to lay off employees as much as possible so that they will not be able to demand raises or residuals for games they make. And yeah, it's a crappy system in my opinion. Alone in the Dark as a game was never going to do amazingly well. It just doesn't have that relevancy to it. But it did seem like it came out well enough. And nobody came out singing its praises, but also nobody came out cursing it for being an awful game either. The biggest complaint I saw on the 2 or 3 people that actually played the game was that the puzzles were kind of old school, difficult puzzle elements. Flaming Fowl, according to game developer, has laid off staff after unveiling a demo for a shelved game, which that's an interesting way to go about doing it, in that you're saying, here's a demo for a game we're not going to make. A last chance bid to attract publisher interest by releasing a demo for a game called Ironmarked. Meanwhile, they're laying off staff, just struggling. Apparently Skyband Entertainment made a similar play with players last week in crowdfunding to develop a AAA game for Invincible. This one was the video game based off of the comic book Invincible. Meta, according to GameDeveloper.com, is expanding a mixed reality ecosystem under the Meta Horizon OS banner. They also want third-party hardware makers to use the OS. And so they want to be the operating system developer for augmented reality and VR. Making kind of an app ecosystem or an app store. Yeah. And I guess that could happen, but highly unlikely to, because you still have that huge barrier of VR glasses just being too expensive. I'm in a different position, certainly mentally nowadays on that, since I am basically recommending to people to spend $600 on a Steam Deck. It's kind of hard to say buy a Steam Deck, but don't spend $600 on a VR headset if you're just going to compare dollars to dollars. It's very easy to make that argument, however, when you think about what you're actually getting with a Steam Deck, which is effectively a fairly decent portable computer that plays a significant portion of games available on Steam that you should, or you highly are likely to already own and have purchased on Steam. Whereas if you bought a VR headset right now, you're not going to own any VR games. And you're still, in most cases for VR headsets, going to need to plug it into a very expensive computer, a $2,000 or $3,000 computer. So the hidden costs there are much, much higher for a VR headset. The actual amount you would use a VR headset is also much, much lower than what you could do with a Steam Deck. If I was commuting to a job somewhere every day, I would be taking that Steam Deck with me every day and playing for 30 minutes to an hour during a lunch break. Almost certainly. If I was in school, then I would try to find some way to safely take a Steam Deck and play it in school. But honestly, that would be very risky. Even in college level schooling, it'd be fairly risky. Somebody's going to steal it. It is a little surprising and sad that Android is taking its time for the Find My Device network to integrate with the iOS Apple Find My Device network, because that kind of technology would be nice if it came to Linux and Windows also, where if a Steam Deck gets lost you could find it, or you could at least remote shut it down and lock it down. Moving on, the Embracer CEO pretty obviously was in a presentation and said a lot of things, so he's now gotten 3 or 4 headlines from the things he's said. In this case, Video Games Chronicle says the Embracer CEO suggests he must shoulder much of the blame for a long list of mistakes. He's the CEO, he must shoulder all of the blame. That's what being the boss is like. That is the one time where poop must roll uphill and land on the lap of the CEO, is when mistakes are made. Because one of 2 scenarios, we can break it down to very basic things. Either he told somebody to do something and it was a mistake, that he told that person to do it because they were the wrong person, or because what he was telling them to do was the wrong action, or he told somebody to do something and that somebody didn't do it, and then he failed to recognize that they didn't do it and fired them and replaced them with somebody who would. At the end, you're the CEO, you're in charge, so you must shoulder all, not much, of the blame for a long list of mistakes, for almost all mistakes. The quote here is, "I'm sure I deserve a lot of criticism." But inherently, the bigger problem here is he's not making good suggestions as to how to fix it either. Like, he's clearly fighting for his life here, and he probably should just retire and quit. And he probably should have done that earlier and saved some face, instead of being voted out by shareholders in disgrace, which is, I imagine, what he's on the verge of. But yeah, I don't see any major suggestions. Even his plan of breaking up the companies back into 3 separate entities, Asmodee, Coffee Stain and Friends, and Middle Earth Enterprises and Friends, sounds pretty dumb, because you just have this "and Friends" at the end of 2 different companies, which is hiding how many other subsidiaries are going to be under control of Middle Earth Enterprises and Coffee Stain. Yeah, none of that. It would have been much nicer if they said we need to focus on AA games, or we need to make one great tentpole game and focus just on making one tentpole AAA game, or we need to focus on making simple single A games and recognize that we're not as big as we had hoped to be. Or we need to focus on being a publisher and publishing games or advertising the games we do have better. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says a new Nintendo Switch system update fixes wireless network issues. Version 18.0.1 also includes a general system stability improvements, which half the time I think that is probably just a lie as far as it updates the licenses for the DRM on the cartridges. It's interesting how similar the layout kind of is. It's not one-to-one by any means of what the top of the Steam Deck is, but on the top of the Steam Deck there is a vent, there is a headphone jack, there is a volume up and volume down buttons. Not these buttons though. One of those may just be a screw, and no power button, and of course no cartridge slot. But yeah, in fairness though, those are kind of default things you have to have. You probably are going to need some cooling, so you're going to need vents. You probably want a headphone jack, and if you have a headphone jack, you probably want volume up and down. It is a little surprising that the volume controls for up and down, if you were going to go back and invent the headphone jack today, you'd almost certainly have volume controls that were built into the headphone jack itself and sending a signal that way. You just have more tips, more rings, more sleeves on the mini stereo jack to send a signal for volume to go up and down. Of course, when stereo jack and mini stereo jacks were being used in the early days, they often were being plugged directly into amplifiers, which would have controlled how loud things were. And there wouldn't have been digital amplifiers that would have turned things up and down. It's probably time for a new standard on that, which would probably just be USB-C. I think most people could see headphone jacks go away like they have on so many other devices in favor of USB-C. One more USB-C port. Most people are going to use Bluetooth and not care about audio quality anyways. And if you really care about audio quality, mini stereo jack's still not really that good. You still would want something like an optical signal coming out. The other thing that this reminded me about Nintendo having an update, it is kind of interesting how we almost never really have anything interesting to say about PlayStation updates or Xbox updates. Honestly, I don't even really see Xbox updating themselves and putting out update notes, whereas PlayStation occasionally does it. Nintendo rarely does it, but I'm not sure I've ever seen any of my news sources mention an Xbox update unless it's a major update that changes things massively. This isn't exclusively to video gamers, but GameDeveloper.com has said that the FTC is now banning restrictive and exclusionary non-competes in the United States. The argument has always been that non-compete clauses have never really been legal, but they certainly scared a lot of people into not going to work for somebody and left room open for lawsuits, which anybody can sue you for any reason, whether they have a good reason or not. But yeah, it is anti-freedom, to say the least, to force or use the fact that somebody is desperate for employment to force them to hurt themselves in the long run by not being able to compete and take what they learned in one job and take it to another job, where inherently these kinds of protections around corporations should definitely go away. It should be very much the case. The one thing that the US government could do is make it so corporations are terrified to lay off or fire people, because they should know that any employee that they've trained and that knows their way of doing business and knows their internal secrets can take all of that information and apply it to their skill set, and then take that skill set and work in a different job. Sure, I'm willing to hear arguments that they can't take internal corporate secrets and just hand that information over to the next employer, but you can certainly say, hey, if I worked on a video game that was a first-person shooter in the last job, I learned how to make first-person shooters. I have that skill set now. I can make a first-person shooter once again. You can't copy the code, or you probably shouldn't be able to copy the code, although in fairness, I think a lot of game code probably shouldn't be copyrightable and should just be public domain in the first place. Now, this bit of good news, I think, also needs to be counterbalanced, because it's not all good news in the United States, with the National Labor Review Board. And this is the problem with the United States government, is that there's not one person really in charge of any of it, or even one person totally on the same page. There's a lot of people who have been put in charge of a lot of things from the previous administrations, and they are going for a very different direction and a different focus than the FTC. So the National Labor Review Board has raised the requirement for mandatory overtime, where it was somewhere around $30,000 if you were making $30,000 or less and you worked over 40 hours a week, then you were technically legally required to be paid overtime. I'm not even sure if overtime in that case was mandated to be time and a half. They have now raised it to somewhere around $58,000, which that's a big difference, certainly. Inherently, it is also worth pointing out that if the National Labor Review Board, and I'm pretty sure it was the National Labor Review Board, changes their rules in such a way, then if, say, somebody like Bernie Sanders could convince people to go to a 4-day work week instead of 40 hours a week, then it would be 32 hours a week, with anything over 32 being considered overtime at that point. Well, here's a pretty obvious way that they could allow companies to avoid paying overtime by just raising the rules. Plenty of people, I'm sure, will still get paid overtime like they always did, because once you give somebody something, they're unlikely to accept it being taken away. But yeah. It is very much often a tit-for-tat thing. And non-compete clauses going away is a good thing. Overtime rules and regulations going away is a bad thing. There is a much longer list of laws and rules that are being passed in individual states and around the United States too, that are extremely anti-labor, eliminating, in Florida, eliminating mandatory lunch breaks for teenage child workers was a law that was passed relatively recently, or is at least being debated by a politician who literally owns a chain of fast food restaurants, which he would obviously directly benefit from if he could just force the employees to not get a paid hour of lunch, or an hour lunch, even unpaid. I think you get paid lunch for at least 30 minutes in most states. Moving on, Ubisoft has appointed Cecil Russell, or maybe Russell, as a new executive VP. Russell's day-to-day duties include, as executive VP, will be to manage multiple departments at Ubisoft, including corporate affairs, legal, and communications. This might be finally the beginning of seeing Yves Guillemot, I believe is the CEO of Ubisoft, finally deciding to leave what has been a fairly slow sinking ship of Ubisoft. Meanwhile, Ubisoft is, for gamers, still just making an occasional, like, more recently, I guess it would be Prince of Persia games. Less recently, you would think Sea of Thieves, and think that Sea of Thieves is the Ubisoft one, and Assassin's Creed games. But if you looked over the course of the last 7 to 10 years, Ubisoft's output has been pretty disappointing. And yeah, I think we are at this point no longer talking about the non-controversy of the employees, the IT department trying to sue Ubisoft for being fired for refusing to do their job because they're upset that they found somebody was making mean joke email pictures that were not appropriate by any means, but also not really directly connected to the IT department's role. That was another case, I guess, of protest that I guess deserves to be applauded, in that the unionized IT department protested and risked being fired and got fired and tried to sue, and seemingly that lawsuit has not gone anywhere. It is weird. Well, I will say this is a very appropriate looking picture. It is weird that it's black and white. It gives me the feeling that this might be a fairly old picture of her. It is cut off a little bit here too. But I wouldn't be upset if there was just a service or press releases always put out pictures like this. This does look like this is easily a ID badge photo that somebody would take just against a white wall. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com says Lars Wingforce says splitting Embracer was for the greater good of business. You gotta break companies to make money is the subheadline here. But yeah. He's getting a lot of press release to stick his foot in his mouth, and we'll just see how that goes in the long run. The irony here is it kind of doesn't even matter what he says. I suspect 6 months from now, a year from now, Embracer Group will still be around. It'll still be doing barely anything. Maybe some companies will come and go, but I don't think it's going to have anywhere as big of an impact on the industry as they would have liked it. And if it does have a big impact, it's probably not going to be positive impact. So here was the Video Games Chronicle take on the hard R graffiti. Stillblade in-game art referencing a racial slur will be removed, Sony says. Now, referencing here, I would argue, is not correct at all. And here we can show the picture just so everybody knows what was going on. Here, almost certainly a significant amount of the texturing and world was procedurally generated once, if not randomly generated always. And so this graffiti hard here shows up in multiple places from what I hear. And then you have Roxanne or Roxy's shop. So you have an R and a shop and open, and it was almost certainly just a random coincidence, something that people who wanted to clutch at pearls and be offended by worked very hard to find that these two things were next to each other. Which again, yeah, I thought it was retarded. That's what I thought. If African American people, since people are taking this as the N word with a hard R, want to be offended about anything in a Korean game, or pretty much any Asian game whatsoever, let's point to something that they have much more realistic reasons to complain about, which is there are almost never any representations of Africans, people of African descendants, whether African American or just African, or descendants of Africans, presented in Asian games, because there are almost no people of African descent in Asian countries. And Asians do have a level of racism that is almost a curiosity around Africans, and it's just something that they don't see. It is very much a fascination and exotification of Africans, in the same way that English people and white people in America exotify Asians, since or used to in the past. But it is also completely unrealistic to expect Korean people, shift up in this case, to make a game and tell a story with an African character when they probably have never seen or spoken to a person of African descent in their life. Like, anything they write would be based off of hearsay, speculation, stereotypes. It wouldn't come out good. In the few cases we have seen it done in like Final Fantasy games and such, it often comes off fairly rough at best, and often, and sometimes just downright racist at worst. And I will counter that argument with the fact that a lot of people of African descent love anime. They love Dragon Ball Z. Like, the fandom of Dragon Ball Z these days is heavy into the African community. And none of those fans are screaming for a black or African descent character in Dragon Ball Z, or for Dragon Ball Z to be changed to cater to them more. They like it for what it is. And this almost certainly, once again, is just something mainstream video game journalists, crybabies, wanted to cry about, because they, at this point, have realized that they can't even complain about attractive female protagonists in Stellar Blade when there is an actual human model that this character is based off of, and the animator that rotoscoped and animated over that human 3D scan of a person is like the wife of the CEO. I think she's the wife of the CEO of Shift Up. Because at that point, if you're gonna say the wife is being sexist by drawing an attractive Asian character, then you're gonna have to make an argument of her being anti-feminist of herself, and that argument falls apart fairly quickly amongst SJWs. You can't blame a female for being anti-females. You're saying IGN pointed this out. I heard it was a website called The Gamer. Kotaku at this point would have been a prime candidate for somebody who would have complained about that, but I don't think Kotaku even has enough staff left to make any kind of articles of any sort. Well, moving on, let's look at all the new games on Steam. Let's see which ones, if any, are good enough to make YouTube Shorts on. I could see if I just became super popular to the point where I could miss out on hundreds, if not thousands of views. I could see making YouTube Shorts that were membership only, and just making all the YouTube Shorts membership only, which that almost would be a benefit to those who don't want to see YouTube Shorts and the non-members more than it would be a benefit to members. And YouTube is working in that direction where there will be member-only shorts. And I can't imagine that anybody really is going to want to go in that direction and pay for a membership to get exclusive shorts. Does this support English? It doesn't really feel like it does. It's a Chinese game. Nah, that's not quite good enough. Skateboarding game. These little neon puzzle games are still weirdly not something I could ever say yes to. Crown Jewels. This has a weird feel to it, like feels like something that could have been released in like a couple decades ago, but has just no place in existing in modern day. Or at least some of these other games still look awful, but they have the bones of a modern game. Hydrogen game, which I assume the idea here is you're mixing chemicals to try and make new chemicals, but that wouldn't really work. You'd have to... No. I was thinking it was a universe game where you would like drag hydrogen and then oxygen, and then you'd get H2O, which in reality it's actually H4O2 is the stable water molecule. They just simplify it to H2O. But that's not what this is at all. This is one of those 2048 games where you get hydrogens, you merge them together, and then that makes a helium. That's not quite how chemistry works. You don't just merge the entirety of the atom together to get the next atom. You have to change the, I think, protons. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. The proton count in the outer shell, or the electron count on the outer shell. I don't think it's the electron count that changes. I think it's either the protons or the neutrons. I wanted to go a lot deeper into chemistry when I was in school, but unfortunately was not able to go in that direction. And I don't think too much would have changed had I done that. But who knows? Some of those academic fields where you end up just being a chemistry teacher unless you have a PhD in chemistry, or you get really lucky and you work at a pharmaceutical company. Yeah. Those are really your two options. this game I was keeping an eye on, the Zao Tales of Kinzera. I'm happy to see it is rated very positive so far. Seems like we're seeing slightly more visual novels in the past couple days. I do question when I'm sitting here going through these games and frankly when I'm just sitting here streaming at all, I question if I'm not getting a little bit more nasally, a bit more whiny sounding. I don't want to come off that way, but when I hear myself in the headphones, sometimes it does feel like maybe just I'm getting a little bit nasally, a little bit more scrunched up in the chair. I talked about earlier how more lately abandoning projects, not really finishing them. Well, another one of those projects that I was planning on doing is add an Act Games 2-player Bluetooth arcade fight stick with a trackball in the middle, and that's been sitting around on the shelf unused for a long amount of time, and I never got anywhere with it. I was thinking I was going to take it apart and put a Raspberry Pi in it, and this would have been during the time of the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, so it's 3 or 4 years ago, but I haven't done anything with it. And with the turnabout of the Steam Deck, I think it's time to give away that big boy. This almost looks like it might be something. But yeah, I was gonna try to put a Raspberry Pi in it with a hard drive, and the technology is just surpassed with the Steam Deck by every metric. This is interesting. You don't get to see a lot of somebody putting a gun to their head. This visual novel is Japanese only. I almost would have assumed that Steam was censoring those types of screenshots, but apparently this one flew by. Might be interesting to see if we recognize the name. Piano Droid in the Submerged Ruins. Yeah, that doesn't seem like anything I've ever heard of. Masonic Mysteries. I haven't heard anybody talk about Masonics or Freemasons in a long time. Conspiracy theories have stopped being silly and kind of funny, and have taken on much more darker overtones as people actually are believing them and reacting to them. It used to be a case that I heard a story about piranhas there, that piranhas are actually very slow eaters and fairly safe to eat around, and that the story of them being ravenous eaters comes from one of the US presidents visiting an African area, city, tribe, and to impress them they starved the piranhas intentionally for a week and then threw a cow into the river to see them eating ravenously. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who was the president. Well, I don't know if that story's really true or not. I just saw it on Reddit. But yeah, that would be believable. You could basically do that with any animal and or human to starve them long enough and then have them act out of desperation to eat as much food as possible and say that's the normal way they act. Almost done. Still not really a lot of great games coming out these days. Haven't been seeing too many RPG Maker games. That's probably nice. Turn of events. And I wonder if we aren't getting to a point where maybe they're holding back because of the Steam Summer Sale. I would have to see a lot more evidence if I was going to start thinking that Valve was actually curating. And I would have to see a lot less of just absolute garbage games, which we still see a decent amount. And yeah, still haven't really done anything as far as the faultless cleanup either. And so that would bring us to the 24-hour peak, and let's see if there's any new games worth mentioning. Fallout 4 is in the 10th spot, and I suspect that the most recent game, other than maybe Palworld, would be what was the name of that game that they gave away for free, then they started charging after April 1st. It's gotta be here somewhere, I would think. Well, maybe not. Maybe it has just fallen completely below the top 100. Yeah, I'm not seeing it at all. So I guess I would kind of put Palworld as the most recent game of real interest. As far as my chart goes, Apex Legends seems to have shot back up, although overall it's still trending downward. Helldivers 2 is trending downward. Arc of Blade Point. Fallout 4 is trending downward. Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that. I seriously doubt they were going to convince people to continue to play Fallout 4 without that next generation update. Had they gotten the next generation update out in time, that would have been a different story, and so we may see it spike back up. But overall, it does seem like there's still just a downward trend today. And it doesn't look to me like there's anything special happening on Steam at the moment. Well, this is new. A full banner ad, effectively, for the Steam Deck. They have abandoned trying to advertise the Steam controller, I think, which is the other thing that they were promoting. And so it'll be interesting to see what that takes you. Well, first of all, you see the person with their feet in the water, and that's fairly risky here, that you're encouraging people to play. People playing in the car are fine, playing on the plane, fine, but feet in water, or you could drop it in the water. This game, to my understanding, they have no IP rating that they even promote. I did look at the refurbed, and the cheapest refurbs, the 64 EMC versions with the LCD screens, so 64 gigabytes of EMC memory, are sold out when I looked earlier today. And the question I'm asking is if maybe there will be a summer sale refurbs of the OLED. And honestly, if you could get it down to $400, I probably would just snag a couple for other people. You could get it even cheaper for refurb, as long as it has that 6 nanometer process and the better battery and the better Wi-Fi. Those are all things I would like. And it's not really a case of Wi-Fi 5 versus Wi-Fi 6E being the improvement. It's almost certainly a case of the chip for Wi-Fi 5 was older, where the chip for Wi-Fi 6E is newer and can probably just handle things a little bit better. The extra screen size, I'm sure, is pretty nice too. But yeah. Is there anything else that looks like new advertisement? Clearly, they've kind of changed the color theming here. They just announced a potential new standard for LPDDR5 RAM, I believe, that would have a minimum of 8,000 megatransfers per second and eliminate some older technology that was insecure with RAM in favor of a newer technology that will be more secure. There's this thing called Rowhammer. I won't get into the details, but it was a way in which you could corrupt RAM or steal sensitive information out of RAM. Yeah, I want to scroll down here. Dual ambient light sensors are built into it. Now, the weird thing about that is there's like a little dot here and a little dot here. And even if I make this huge, you probably won't be able to see it, but well, yeah, there's a dot here and a dot here. And those might be microphones, actually. And then the dual ambient light sensors, I think, are here behind the screen and here, because there's clearly something behind the screen you can see. It looks like it's either an infrared transmitter, which would make sense if you had like a Joy-Con that you were pointing towards it, but they don't have anything like that. So I'd assume it's just those are the light sensors on the edges, which I bought a rubber case, and that rubber case covers up those light sensors anyway, so yeah, it's not actually going to accomplish anything. I assume these are speakers and not the headphones, not microphones. But yeah, let's see. Bluetooth 6.0 might be an upgrade worth going for. Tri-band 6E is probably not something you'd ever use. 6 gigahertz 2x2 MIMO, multi-input, multi-output, is something more likely that your router would actually handle at 6 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz even. It's questionable whether your router would even support 6 gigahertz at all. You might very well have just an AC or an AX, and at this point, if you have a BGN or AC router, 802.11 router, if it says any of these things instead of Wi-Fi 5, 6, or 6E, it's probably time to place it. Yeah, dual microphone array. Multi-channel audio via display port over USB-C, standard USB-C, or 5.3 audio. Yeah, there's nothing here at all that says anything about waterproofness. It's not even mentioned for the Steam Deck OLED, and I assume the same is true for the LCD. Like, it probably is a 4 or 5 on the IP rating if they were going to say. SteamOS 3 Arc based, they should roll out a SteamOS 4 fairly quickly. And they definitely should do a lot more tweaking to KDE Plasma. There is an argument that maybe they should just make their own custom fork of KDE Plasma as a desktop environment and have it very much customized for Steam, particularly since the next version of KDE, whether that's called Plasma or not, is going to be more on using Wayland video rendering instead of the X11's system. There is this knock-on effect, certainly, of having a Steam Deck that has to be pointed out too, that the second you buy a Steam Deck, you still just want to talk about the Steam Deck. Yeah, here's your refurbs at the moment, where you could get the 512 LCD for $359, $40 more to double your gigabyte size. It's not a bad deal. You're not going to likely get 250 gigabytes of, well, for that amount of money. There, I believe, was a slight difference between the screen for the 512 versus the 256 too. So your best bet, if you're going to try and save $200 over the OLED, which I would argue is probably not worth it because the battery life and the cooling is so much better on the OLED version, buying the 512 gigabyte version still might make some sense. But yeah, the real way to go is here. And yeah, you're going to struggle. You would struggle to fill up another 512 gigabytes of space. To $100 difference here, it's not that different. But for the extra space, but you would just have to really want to fill it up with ROMs or something if you're going to do that. What this does tell me, however, here we have Crownfall Dota 2 being promoted on Steam, is that there is going to be a focus on promoting the Steam Deck during the next sale. That they are showing a real world here with real world adults playing it. Now noticeably, they don't have a single kid playing it. You would have thought you would have had at least one kid playing it, but they're not targeting anybody there. And in fairness, it'd be kind of hard. Your games everywhere is a bit of a stretch. Yes, you can play your games if you're remote playing to the Steam Deck. You can play all of your games everywhere if you're connected to a local thing, a local network. I don't think you can stream and remote play games over the internet. And each of these examples is really somebody who wouldn't be at their home on their home Wi-Fi. It is also worth pointing out that on Steam, a lot of games, if not all games, will let you through the Steam client potentially launch the game on your computer so that you would be streaming the audio and video from the Steam Deck to your computer. And so that might be the way that's best for me to try and play the few games that run on the Steam Deck that don't run on it. Here's that game I was thinking about. Content warning. Yeah, I didn't even see it in the top 100 today. I guess Eden Chronicles might be the biggest news at the moment. But overall, on the Steam page, it doesn't look that interesting. VR, which maybe that's what they were promoting otherwise, has been pushed down to just the Valve Index being $1,000 for the Valve Index VR kit and games, which I bet We don't even see Half-Life Alyx in this list. We see Boneworks, Bone Labs. Nope, I was wrong. Half-Life Alyx is here. Fallout VR, Beat Saber, Skyrim. Yeah, that's probably all the good games worth ever owning on VR. Definitely not $1,000 worth of games to play. And inherently, I'm a little bit peeved that I spent $600 buying a Steam Deck and got no store credit to buy any games at all, and that there is a potential scenario where somebody buys the Steam Deck and then has no games that they can play or can only play free-to-play games. I would be doubly peeved if I spent $1,000 on a VR headset and got no games at all for it. Alright, well, let's do the headlines here and see if we can wrap up this stream fairly quickly. I'm looking at the chat right now. I'm not seeing anybody saying hi on the chat, so I'm gonna have to assume nobody did say hi today. But apologies if the chat is just broken. It seems like it likes to move around and break on me. Everything does. Video games news from videogameschronicle.com. Here we go. Blizzard is seeking a handful of directors to work on an unannounced game. Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble trailer reveals multiplayer battle modes. Okay. I could see how that would be good to add to Super Monkey Balls, to have more people battling each other. As one of the rare cases, I think where adding multiplayer probably does add value to a game without hindering the main game that much, because I don't think the main game of Super Monkey Ball can change that much. It really is just the same concept over and over from game to game. Stellar Blade in-game art referencing a racial slur will be removed, says Sony. PlayStation Store's May savings promotion includes discounts of up to 75%. Suspect charged for canceling the Nintendo Japan events by threatening to kill everyone for shitty games. PS5 system update adds community game help feature. So this was one. This is an update worth mentioning. The feature automatically captures footage from players who opt into the feature and serves them to players looking for help in a specific area of supported games. So effectively it's going to capture footage of players who do well in those sections of the game and just automatically make walkthrough guides. Meanwhile, that's going to undercut anybody who wants to be a content creator for having any control of what they're making as far as walkthrough guides, and it's going to undercut anybody who is making curated walkthrough guides and trying to post that on some place like YouTube, now that there will be fewer people looking for walkthrough type guides on YouTube and other services. I wouldn't be surprised if some feature like that eventually has ads crammed into it. There is a point certainly here where one of the console manufacturers could just flip a switch and you could start to see ads before every hint in a game. If you need a hint, ads as games are loading up, ads as the systems are booting up, ads in games is something Microsoft has already experimented with. It could get really bad really fast. Fallout TV show leads to massive listenership boost for a soundtrack artist. League of Legends player suspended for streaming inappropriate behavior with a stuffed bear. The player claims he was only hugging and rocking a little bit. This is one of those stories where it probably isn't worth going into the details unless you really know this player, Lian Ju. But yeah, whatever. We will just leave it at that. Bit Trip Runner Remaster Bit Trip Rerunner is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. These games are not... These pages are not lining up correctly. Either a little too zoomed in or something. I don't know. Maybe it's because the headline is just so long. Switch's online Nintendo 64 app gets 2 more games today. Extreme G and Iggy's Wrecking Balls have been added to the library. It definitely feels like they are running out of options here as far as games from the Nintendo 64 era. There was no warning. 2K faces community backlash after banning a leading WWE 2K24 creator. Fallout 76 attracted over 1 million players in a single day, Bethesda says. One YouTuber has made some smart moves, in my opinion, and good success, I think, by using the Fallout TV show to really compare it to how poorly Starfield is after, I believe it's been over a year since Starfield has been released. How there's just kind of not any patches or updates that have changed enough or improved things in Starfield, and how the game is in a really, really unenjoyable state, according to that YouTuber. And so he made that video, and then a couple days later, he made a almost the exact same style video talking about how Fallout 76 is still a rather unplayable and unenjoyable game too, and that there really hasn't been much added or updated in Fallout 76. I definitely feel like Fallout 76 in particular is going to lose its player base fairly quickly. Maybe it will manage to keep its player base just a little bit longer than Fallout 4, since Fallout 4 is a single player game, but I think we are going to see a fairly large crash around the Fallout games now that the Fallout TV series is out and people could easily have seen all of it at this point. There is also a statement that was put out from one of the people in charge of Fallout, I believe, just not really saying directly that they don't care if the Fallout TV series is changing some of the canon for Fallout New Vegas in particular, because they just don't care about Fallout New Vegas. On the other hand, it would be nice to just do some research and figure out what Obsidian is doing recently and why Obsidian didn't just try to make a competitor to Fallout, a Fallout New Vegas in spirit, if not in title. I think Obsidian actually did do that, because I bet Obsidian has made one of those other games. They just probably didn't have the budget to make it 3D and have all that Fallout feel to it. I still think Microsoft would do well to just license out all the Bethesda games to other companies, or at least other departments that they own, and get away from the Bethesda style of making things. And I think it's called the Gamebryo engine. Get rid of whatever engine they're using. Moving on. PlayStation Plus Premium has added 4 new game trials. Interesting. Just trials, though. Feels like that's barely news. Destiny 2, the final shape trailer, journeys into the Traveler. So it does seem to me like what has happened here is I can either squish the text, maybe zoom, just kind of only so far as I can do it with my different ways of handling this. We have Antonio Williams on the chat saying Fallout 76 or 76 was horrible. I assume he's talking about Fallout 76. Yeah, that's what I've heard too. I definitely was not interested in it from the looks of it. Yeah, I think that's probably about as good as I can get it, and that's still not particularly good. The better move would be to do something like this, I guess. Let's see if we can do anything here. Nope. uBlock Origin has updated how they do their cosmetic filter picker too. I think that's a little bit better. Embracer CEO suggests he must shoulder much of the blame for a long list of mistakes. Let's try and finish here. Yeah, Antonio says don't waste your time. Yeah, well, the good news there is as a content creator, I never play multiplayer games unless there's some major exception to it, because my experience playing in a multiplayer MMO type game, or just multiplayer in general, is only going to be slightly close to what someone else's experience would be. So you're not making very good curation or criticism by playing a multiplayer game, because other people's experience may be completely different. And a major part of that certainly is, do you have a group of friends? Are you having fun with that group of friends? If yes, then almost any multiplayer game can be fun. Antonio also follows up, I wish they'd give up on Destiny 2. Well, the good news is I think they are giving up on Destiny 2. The bad news is they probably are just going to announce a Destiny 3. So I don't think there's a lot of hope there that they would do something new or interesting. Moving on. New Nintendo Switch update fixes wireless network issue. It's been really painful. Ex-Lionhead developer explains why they've announced and shelved a new game. This was also the company that laid off half of its staff, saying it was necessary. Lack of industry investment is what they're blaming. Antonio says Remnant 2 is a good multiplayer. Well, I feel the need to play Remnant 1 first, and still would just go back to the games I play. I just don't play multiplayer overall. GTA 5 Trevor actor claims that he shot some stuff for DLC starring his character before it was cancelled. Agent Trevor was one of the 3 Datamine DLC packs. Yeah, it's very believable, certainly. I don't think that really means anything now. Either. I imagine most actors or voice actors make extra content that gets left on the cutting room floor in almost every game. Game publishers won't support libraries for preserving online games. ESA lawyer claims there's currently no legal way to keep online games active after official support has ended. I would say the word legal there is not accurate. There are plenty of legal ways in which you could keep online games active after official support has ended. Plenty of ways. All you would need to do is sign a piece of paper or even give a verbal promise that you aren't going to sue people. And that is really what they're saying here, is that we would sue people. This screenshot is better than the last screenshot though, in that it actually is showing bookshelves covered in multiple copies of video games, which weirdly I would think that this has to be some kind of library, because it doesn't make a lot of sense that you would just have 4 copies of yeah, I don't see any other reason why you'd have 4 copies on the shelf in the same place. If anything, if you were making a library for preservation, you would probably want 1 copy somewhere else, or at least every copy in different places, even if it was just different shelves in the same place. Antonio says, I need to get a PC so I can go back to playing World of Warcraft. Well, I know that they're doing some things with the classic servers on World of Warcraft that sound like it might interest some people. I don't think they're doing too much to catch people's attention as far as the newer versions of World of Warcraft. Now might be the best time ever to stay away from World of Warcraft, knowing that Blizzard and Activision are now owned by Microsoft, and that there is a potential that changes could be around the corner there, but it probably won't. Probably nothing will happen. Metaphor ReFantasio release date confirmed during a developer live stream. That would be October 11th, 2024. Atari has brought back the Infogrames brand as a publishing label. This is the logo I recognize for Infogrames. The new Infogrames will acquire and publish games with non-Atari intellectual property, which will mean basically nothing and not really be connected, I think, to the old Alone in the Dark game that they're highlighting here. A new Fortnite setting will let players avoid seeing confrontational emotes. I'm still not sure what the confrontational emotes are, except for the loser dance in particular, where you do the L and dance back and forth. That's the only one I think they're thinking about, although there probably are a couple more. Samus didn't appear in Fortnite because Nintendo wanted her to be a Switch exclusive. Meta partners with Xbox as it opens Quest OS to third-party hardware makers. That's going to bring us to the Komatsu articles now. Paladins for PC launches May 15th. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it looks like that. Could be something, could be nothing. Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble details multiplayer battle modes. Komatsu here has an actual screenshot, and their page is just frankly rendering a little bit better. I think the arcade nature of Super Monkey Ball also works well to have multiplayer, player versus player concepts too. It's silly and not serious in its design and its display. Insurmountable is now available for the PS5 and 4, the Xbox One and Series, and the Switch. Apparently this was previously released in 2021. I would have to assume that this is a rock climbing game. I kind of feel like this is a rock climbing game that was promoted, but I might be thinking of a different rock climbing game a while ago. Yeah, I don't think this is the game that I'm thinking about. I think there is another wall rock climbing game that may still be in development. Perhaps too many rock climbing games have been made over the past few years. But, you know, there probably is an audience there. A small niche audience, but an audience nonetheless. Famitsu review scores for issue 1847 are available on Gamatsu. They're giving Gift, which is a game I don't even recognize, a 29 out of 40, particularly low. Sandland is getting a 35 out of 40, fairly high. And then Toho Mistia's Izakaya is 30 out of 40. Sandlands takes 20 to 30 hours to clear and over 100 hours with side activities. It may still be fairly difficult for me to play something like Sandlands, not being familiar with the manga at all. But yeah, I'll be very interested to see how popular Sandland is in the West. Death End Request Code Z launches September 19th in Japan. They teased this game for a while, and now they've come out and fully admitted it, and that was the game that was coming. Lords of the Fallen version 1.5 update, Masters of Fate, is now available. Let's see what that looks like on Steam. Well, it's not so far doing great for them. 61% in the last 30 days, 61% overall. Definitely looks like it's trying to be a Dark Souls game, but definitely not getting the same reception. A 1.5 update is not a 2.0 update for sure, but maybe that'll work. And here's a kind of great example of where you just have a lot of mainstream video game journalists giving very high reviews and it not being in line with the actual audience and the actual players of the game. Significant performance improvements, custom difficulty modifiers. Bit Trip Rerunner is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series. It's already available on Steam and very positive at 98%. That is a massively high positive rating. So, should I make a YouTube short on a game just because it's coming to consoles? I guess. I might become more stringent on those kinds of decisions later on, once I've made as many YouTube shorts as I humanly could ever make. After years of doing it, I guess, is basically the thought there. Adventure Bar's Story is now available worldwide for the PS5 and PS4, and launches April 25th for the Switch and May 9th for PC. It's a bar management RPG. Which could be a gimmick, or it could be something worthwhile. I played that game Battleship Brigade, and I thought I would really like that around the gimmick of doing a cooking battle video game, but the actual implementation there was just not as interesting as I would have liked it to be. Dokapon Sword of Fury Remaster has been announced for a Switch. Wonder if this one will come to the West. Dokapon. Sounds like a game I've heard of, but I'm not recognizing any of these visuals. Nintendo 64 and Nintendo Switch Online adds Extreme G and Iggy's Wrecking Balls. Wired Productions and LKA are working on a new project. This would be the studio behind The Town of Light and Martha is Dead. Which, okay, I guess we'll have to wait and see what they do. Bulwark, Falconer Chronicles Free Update, Trade, Tribute, and Splinter is announced. Is this a PC game? Yeah, it came out in March. And apparently he's going to get some free DLC at some point in the future. I think I'm not going to bother to make a YouTube short on that, on the promise of free DLC. Dig VR has been announced for the Quest 2 and 3. One would assume that this is something where you control a digger, although right now it has a crane attachment on it, not the digger bucket attachment. Lamote, the Master Mote Chronicles, coming to PS5, Xbox Series, alongside a co-op mode update this summer. This is a Steam game, but it is also a bright neon game. Yeah, okay, I'll give that a chance and make a YouTube short on it. I don't have too many more headlines today. Hotel Architect launches in early access in 2024. Yep. I don't think that one's going to be my style, so I'm not going to put it on the follow list. Deliver Us the Moon is coming to the Switch in 2024. One of the problems certainly here is that unless there's a specific release date, if somebody says it's coming out at some point in 2024, I probably shouldn't really rush to make a YouTube short to promote it again. Psychological horror game Karma: The Dark World to be published by Wired Productions for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. That very much has a feel of something like Death Stranding, at least that one picture does. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever get around to playing Death Stranding at this point either. Gory Cuddly Carnage launches August 29th. You can almost never go wrong with cats. Give that a chance. Exophobia launches July 23rd. This pretty obviously is a Doom style shooter. Not really my style, but I'll make a short around it. Deck builder card game Heart of Crown Online for PC is now available in early access. Now, even though I really have lost almost all interest in Yu-Gi-Oh! I have to admit the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is still very much popular. And I seriously doubt Heart of Crown Online is going to be anywhere as popular. I'll be surprised if it even rose to the level of something like Shadowverse. So yeah, I can't just eagerly jump away to a new card game. And this is a deck building card game anyways, not a collectible card game, which would mean they probably aren't going to commit to adding a bunch of new cards like a collectible card game would. Does have some cute visuals, but it probably isn't going to mean much. Stellar Blade Developer Diary The Journey Episode 2 is available on Gamatsu. It's also important, I guess, to point out that Stellar Blade is not available to the public until April 26, 2 days from now. So any early reviews are from people who got early access. Morbid, The Lords of Ire adds an Xbox One version, and the release date has moved up to May 17th. And moving up the release date doesn't justify making another YouTube short around it. So I'm going to say no to that. First-person psychological mystery game Thalassa Edge of the Abyss for PC launches June 18th. Does kind of feel like we might be going more into psychological horror games these days. Not that they aren't fairly common always. Ginka is coming to Switch on September 19th. It's a visual novel currently available for PC. Let's see what the reviews are on that one. Incredibly positive. This was October 2023 that it came out. Got a tab here out of order. Well, we can fix that, I think, pretty easily. I'll just drag that to the left and move on. Atari revives Infograms for a publishing label. Yeah, it's Infograms, not Infogames. Zenless Zone Zero pre-registration is now available. Atlas Fest 2024 set for June 8th and 9th. This is a festival they sometimes call their announcements of games festivals. To XKO, Ilaoi the Kraken Priest has a gameplay trailer on Gamatsu. That is a mouthful of a name. It might be an example of where you can have a character with a weird name in a video game and it just not be spoken out loud, in the same way you could have a character with a weird name in a book and it just wouldn't be spoken out loud, and thus it can be a little bit weirder. But this looks like this is a fighting game and that this is just one character. They're promoting. Metaphor ReFantasio launches October 11th. Don't really know what this Metaphor ReFantasio series is. I feel like I must have seen a game in this series before. Does kind of have that feeling of being a Persona spin-off, or a Shin Megami Tensei spin-off to be more accurate. But I'm not sure if it's in that same universe. Tales of the Shire, a Lord of the Rings game, launches this fall for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. And that's our last Gematsu article, and pretty sure I had already made a YouTube short on that game. And that would bring us to GameDeveloper.com. Somehow I've managed to keep this short and sweet, and I feel like it mostly boils down to just how many games get released on Steam. We covered most of these stories: Valve updating its Steam refund policy to cover advanced access playtime, FTC banning restrictive and exclusionary non-competes in the United States, Microsoft cutting jobs in Bethesda, France is a new story. Let's see if we can read that. And I think pretty much all these others we had covered. Right, so where was that tab I just opened? Here it is. Microsoft is cutting jobs at the Bethesda, France. The redundancies are part of the 1,900 layoffs announced by Microsoft in January. It is unknown the number in Bethesda, France. It'll be unknown as far as whether France tries to fight those layoffs more, since France is often very pro-labor and heavy unionized. Alright, well, that's going to be it for the show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching.